Shooting for world speed record in the Air Force's F-101A Voodoo fighter bomber, Major Adrian E. Drew takes to the air at the Air Force Flight Test Center. The speed and flight path of the swept-wing aircraft are carefully plotted with camera and radar equipment as Major Drew makes 2 runs over the course. He sets a new world record of 1,207 and 6/10 miles per hour, bettering the previous British record by more than 75 miles per hour. Award for Major Drew's performance, the Distinguished Flying Cross. The U.S. Air Force forges ahead with another successful assault on the frontiers of speed.
My name is Robert M. Wood, and I go by Dr. Bob these days. I have a degree in aeronautical engineering from the University of Colorado, and then I subsequently got a PhD in physics from Cornell. And I went right into McDonnell Douglas as a young engineer and stayed with McDonnell Douglas for 43 years, graduating basically through the various management steps, and wound up in charge of various aspects of our research and development programs, including the last one was the space station program. So that's my background. That I had a story that I could tell to my management. Since I'd concluded that the UFOs were real, one day when I was driving to work, I said, well, wow, there's no other solution. They're clearly real, they're clearly extraterrestrial, and they work somehow. And I think we ought to figure out how they work, because I wouldn't want to be the last aerospace company to discover gravity control. I think we ought to be the first. So I took a briefing to my management, and my management was very sympathetic at that particular time for some new creative ideas. They didn't have much of a basic research program, and I offered a very modest project to look into this problem. So we did some things like seeing whether we could change the speed of light by a large axial magnetic field. And we hired Stan Friedman, actually, to use the UFO literature as a basis for clues as to what technology might be involved. There were other things as I became more familiar with the literature that I gradually developed an opinion on. One was the opinion that the psychic communication was always a clue and was usually present. As I remember, the one case that particularly impressed me of some guy in Mexico said he came around, he was hiking, he came around a corner, and there was this huge alien with a device around his belt. And so the guy touched the belt, turned a knob, and all of a sudden he was hearing what the alien was thinking, directly, just like that. And say, well, you know, that's what we need is a device like that. All you have to do is figure out how it works. And it should be straightforward once we study that. That's why when I was in the vault, I was working with a guy who turned out, you may have even heard of him. His name is Jack Houck, who had a good deal of interest in studying anomalous things that had to do with the mind. And so he had been looking at the subject of remote viewing. He invented the PK party with Colonel John Alexander, and whom you may know, well, whom people may know of. And Jack got me interested in becoming familiar with remote viewing. And so I met Hal Puthoff when he was working at SRI. And Hal told me about their program there. And one thing led to another, that we did a little coordinate remote viewing program of our own. And it turned out that Mr. McDonnell became aware of this fact, that we were doing this in the vault. Or at least we were thinking about doing it. And he called me into his office one day when I was back at St. Louis on a business trip. And I thought, you know, I'm about to about to get really chastised. But he talked to me for 2 hours and said he was excited to find out there was somebody who was interested in the subject because, you know, he named his airplanes the Phantom and the Voodoo because he believed in that stuff. And the Banshee, I think. There were maybe 4 names.